Welcome to WellCare 101, what you need to know to protect your family. I'm Steve Wilson with the Illinois State Water Survey at the U of I, and this is part of the program for the private well class, which is privatewellclass.org, and we're partnered with the Rural Community Assistance Partnership and funded by US EPA to work with well owners and other professionals that work with well owners to build awareness, help folks understand what it means to be a good steward of their well, and why it's important to take care of their well and their water quality in order to ensure good health. So thanks for attending today. We do offer continuing education credit through NEHA and through the Illinois LEHP program for licensed environmental health professionals. And so NEHA works on a 2-year schedule. I throw this up because we've offered this webinar several times in the last 2 years. And depending on when your credentialing cycle starts, you can only get credit for this once during the same credentialing cycle. We can provide a certificate of attendance, a copy of the slide deck, and the completed NEHA forms. You need to email us at info@privatewellclass.org, and we can work with you to get that done. We are a small team, and every month we end up having folks contacting us wondering where their certificates are. You just need to be patient. If you send us an email, you will get the information. And so with that, and I do want to mention that you have to participate live. We do record this and make it available on our website and our YouTube channel, but you can't get any kind of continuing education credit for watching the recording. Okay. So again, this is part of a national program funded by US EPA. We partner with RCAP and a number of other entities, including NEHA, the National Environmental Health Association. And so it follows the privatewellclass.org 10-lesson class, but it's not, it's the 10-lesson class has a lot more material than we could provide here in 90 minutes or 2 hours. And so this is being recorded. It will be available. And one other thing, we will answer some of the questions you've given us when you registered at the end, as well as if you have any questions that come up during today's webinar, feel free to go to the GoToWebinar, your little GoToWebinar window, and either the question box or the chat box, whichever of those you have, you can put questions in there. We're monitoring that, and we'll bring those questions up at the end, and we'll stay and answer questions as long as you ask. All right. I mentioned RCAP, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. You should really know a little bit about them, whether you're a well owner or a professional. You can tell by the colors here which states belong to which regional affiliate. We're in Illinois. That's the Great Lakes Community Action Partnership. They have staff in all 7 or 8 of those states, including Illinois, that work with private well owners and small community water and wastewater systems. Many of their staff are licensed water or wastewater operators, as well as some of their staff are also private well experts as far as they work directly with well owners. They've went out in the field and helped solve problems, and they can also speak to many issues related to private wells. And so we certainly encourage you to learn more about what they offer. They can be a speaker for an event for a local group that wants to raise awareness about private wells. They can help organize an event. They also do private well assessments, which are free to the homeowner. They're free to everyone, actually. And so, and that's spending time directly with the well owner at their home, going through all anything related to a private well. And we talk more about this in some of our other webinars, but these assessments, they've done nearly 4,000 of them across the country since we started that program. And it's a way to learn more about your well, to understand what things might cause a risk, and also to help you understand what the best practices are related to your well and taking care of it and your drinking water quality. And so if you're interested in any of those activities, their email addresses are here, or their websites and their phone numbers. You can also just contact us at info@privatewellclass.org. If you're interested in assessment, just let us know that and what state you're in, and we can get it to the right person with the RCAP network. And together there are about 300 staff around the country that work on rural and small system water and wastewater issues. So, and they also have an assessment program for your on-site or septic system. That's new. I keep forgetting to mention that, but they could also come out and evaluate if there's any potential issues there, or do both at the same time. So we work at the Illinois State Water Survey, which most folks, even in Illinois, a lot of folks haven't heard of, but we've been around forever, 128 years. It was formed by our state legislature in 1895 to look at, really to look at cholera and typhoid issues that were happening and linked to water. And so we've been around a long time. We're a sister agency to our state geological survey. Most states only have a geological survey. And so we're kind of unique in that respect, but we deal with all things water, groundwater, surface water, atmospheric sciences, and chemistry. And so what's really cool about the history of the survey, the ISWS, is the work that we've done over the years related to understanding water issues. A lot of research. We also do education and outreach, and we also house the state's water well logs in Illinois, as well as support communities by doing pump tests and a lot of other activities. We have a set of archives that go back to around 1900. And for instance, this is a graph of typhoid deaths in Quincy from 1783 to 1910. And you can see the difference when they added a filter plant to their water treatment system. And so this was a common thing going on back then. We were instrumental and involved in helping the communities in Illinois begin using drinking water treatment for their community water supplies. This is a glass plate slide that's in our archives. It's just, I think it's a really neat story here. There was a large outbreak of typhoid in the Rockford, Illinois area. There were nearly 120 cases, I believe. And one of the things they investigated is if it was the milk that was being delivered that was causing this typhoid. So they investigated E. Erickson's dairy route to find out how many cases and how often. And you can see there were about 8 cases that were related to that. So not the source in all likelihood. This glass plate, I show it because we found these in storage, and some of them are broken, but they have quite a history to tell about disease and public health in Illinois. Just a few more examples of things from our files. If you've seen a modern drill rig today, a lot different animal than what these folks were using for Weldon, which is a small town about 30 miles west of here in 1922. Okay, so I'm Steve Wilson. I'm a groundwater hydrologist here at the survey. Katie Buckley's with us. She's our water resources outreach specialist. And if you have questions, she's the one who's going to be monitoring that today. She also is the person you'll deal with related to the CEUs. She's also going to do her poll question in a minute. She kind of just keeps me on track. And Sally Dolan is also here today. She's our senior scientific specialist in environmental public health. Sally is a licensed environmental health professional, and she's going to participate in the Q&A today. We're going to announce our new hotline, which Sally's in charge of. And so there may be some questions there, and so she's joined us today. So with that, Katie, hopefully you can hear me. That was an internal problem. You can launch the poll question.
I'm going to say Katie actually can't hear, so I will be launching the poll question for you. So I've launched it.
Oh, great. Thanks, Sally.
So our question today is, what role best describes you as a participant on our webinar today? So if you'll look at that, we'll give you a couple seconds here.
Yeah, and we do look at this as far as continuing education credit and stuff, so we really hope everyone will fill it out.
We only have 70%, so we'll give you a little bit more time.
And part of this is we also, because we're funded by a federal agency, there's things they want us to indicate to them as well. So some of this is not only for our benefit, but also to help them understand who's interested in our program and what demographics and some of those things. So it's really useful to us if you participate. So yeah, I think you can probably go ahead and close it.
Okay. And then I'll share the results. It looks like we have 31% are well owners, 6% well professionals, 21 health professionals, 29 regulatory, and 13 others. So thank you all for being here. And Steve, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you. It's good to see so many well owners here today, which because our program offers CEUs, we end up with a lot of regulators and environmental health professionals, which is great because they're the folks that most well owners go to directly. And so it's an opportunity to develop a consistent program, if you will, and some of those things. Okay, the things you really need to remember as a private well owner, they're not regulated. It's really, once they're installed, and I'm talking about their drinking water quality, it's really up to the owner and user to be sure the water's safe to drink and the system's maintained. And you can't go by the way it looks, tastes, or smells. It can be colorless, odorless, and have no taste, and still have contamination. You know, arsenic is a common constituent in groundwater in some areas, and you won't see it, smell it, or taste it. It's just, the water could look crystal clear, all those things. And so the only way to know is to test. I pay $50 to $70 a month for my community water supply water. That's my water bill. I did grow up on a shallow dug well on a farm in central Illinois, but now I live in town and have city water. And so that $50 to $70 is really the cost spread out over all the residents in our community for not only sampling the water to make sure it's safe, having a licensed operator and a crew that makes sure that our infrastructure is in place, but also just keeping the pressure, all those things so that we're in compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. And for a private well owner, making sure your water quality is good and that your well is maintained and you always have water pressure. All those things are your responsibility. And it's what you really need to understand about being a well owner. It is a mechanical system. Eventually something will fail. And the more you understand what's going on and how that works, the better off you'll be and more likely you'll be to be able to figure out what's going on if you do have a problem. And we do find that the two biggest reasons for well problems and well water quality problems are poor well construction and just lack of knowledge from well owners who don't really understand those issues or why it needs to be maintained or what things they need to do to ensure things are always in working order. Okay. As far as well considerations, we get questions a lot about well depth. Deeper is generally better. The farther away from the surface you are, the less likely that surface contamination is going to get in a well. That doesn't always hold true, and sometimes deeper aquifers may have other constituents like uranium or arsenic that may not be in a shallower system. But and there is no quote definition of deeper, right? It's in some areas, it really varies. It varies on the geology, a lot of things, but understanding and knowing your well depth and where your water is coming from so you can relate that to the geology of the area and how protected it may be are important to understand, as well as where your well's at on the landscape. Is it in a bottom ground near a stream or a ditch? Is it on a bluff? All those things matter. Groundwater flow direction, groundwater is always moving as part of the hydrologic cycle. You may not always know that. We may not be able to tell you that, but in general, if that information is available or it can be teased out from information available from a state agency or whatever, it's good to understand and know what's upstream of you, so to speak, versus what's downstream, because that can certainly affect things. And the area surrounding your well, really, how protective are you of your well? Do you store things near it? Is there a barn with, chemicals in it near it? Just anything, common sense things about what not to do near your well and why it needs to be protected from any type of nearby source. Okay, so as far as correcting poor well construction, what we find, well construction codes really began around the time the EPA started in the late 60s, early 70s. Some states didn't develop well construction code until as late as 2000, there's 2 states that still don't have well construction code, which really should not be the case, but it is. But if your well was already in place when those codes were developed, or were installed based on an older code, and now the code today is more protective, then these wells that don't meet current code a lot of times end up being our problem wells that get bacteria in them or surface contamination or have those kinds of issues. Before the 60s, wells were put in pits in northern climates because if you had the well all the way at the surface and ran your pipes into the home, during the winter, they'd freeze. And so you put a well in a pit, you ran a water line 3 or 4 feet below land surface so that during the winter, it would not freeze. And the problem with those is a lot of times those pits, if there's a heavy rain event, might fill up with water. If the well cap isn't properly sealed, then that surface water can get in your well and contaminate it. They're also just, they're a safety hazard. And we also see hand dug wells. Like, I mentioned the well I grew up on, it was 14 foot deep and it was hand dug by my grandfather in 1933. It's brick lined. It was in a ravine in a pasture where we had livestock. Totally unprotected. It was contaminated always, in all honesty. And that's what people knew in those days. And my dad believed our well water was the best tasting in the world, and it was better than city water because communities put chemicals in their water, and that's bad for you. Not understanding that bacteria and some natural things and runoff can all get into that well and cause those kind of problems. And so there's really 2 issues. As I mentioned, they're both an opportunity for surface contamination as well as a safety hazard. And so those really need to be dealt with. So here's a couple examples. The picture on the top left is from Washington State Department of Ecology, which is the state agency that regulates well drilling and well construction in Washington State. They had a blog where they posted pictures and had information for both drillers and well owners. This is a well, you can see it's corrugated pipe as the casing. There's a jet pump there or a suction pump, and they had a big piece of plywood over that, and it broke when she stepped on it, and this woman fell to her death. But if you look at this little building, there's a funnel there that's probably to add oil. It looks like the gray stuff on the ground is old insulation that's rotted. There's probably mice and other things that get in there. This is not a protective cover for a well. And, there's probably a lot of things floating on top of the water in that well. And when you look down there, as an example, we actually had frogs in our well one time that had got into our well. There's a long story there, but not protective is the bottom line. And the picture on the upper right, this is from Southern Illinois. It's an old brick well that someone had put a concrete tile casing vertically in it, but it only stuck up about 6 inches above land surface, and it wasn't covered. And this well wasn't in use anymore, but it's a good example of what can happen. A goat getting in a well is not a usual thing, but these things can happen, and especially in an old abandoned well like this one. And so we hear stories all the time: snakes, frogs, just bugs, you name it, rabbits. A lot of things can fit. Like the well on the bottom here is an old hand dug well that they've covered with 2x8s and 2x10s, and then some pieces of tin with blocks and concrete blocks and rocks to hold it all down. Those posts look so worn because that's a cattle pasture, and the cows come over there and scratch on those posts as well as do their business, which that infiltrates right in the ground next to the well. It's a shallow brick lined well where water can get in at any depth. completely unsafe. And this is still this farm family's water supply, or it was 10 or 15 years ago. So what to do if you have a well like this? You need to bring it up to code if you can, to protect the water quality, as well as make it safe and not have well in a pit and those sorts of things. If you have a pipe already, if it's a 6-inch casing that's in a pit, for instance, extend that to the surface, fill in that area around it with clay grout, and install a pitless adapter if you need to take care of getting the water to the house. If you have an old well, a lot of times there isn't a lot you can do, especially an old dug well. You may want to consider a different well if you have contamination problems. And if you haven't tested and you have one of these wells, most of the time these wells get contaminated pretty easily. And so it's something to talk to your county or a contractor or a well authority excuse me, about what your best options are. You can even contact us or your extension in your state about what kind of options you might have. But yeah, you need to protect your supply. The same thing for abandoned wells, and by abandoned, I mean unused wells that need to be abandoned properly. Because well logs weren't required until at least the 60s, in some cases much later, we find that there's many wells that we don't have on file, like in our well logs in Illinois. Boy, excuse me. Yeah, and like wells and pits, an old abandoned well is a safety hazard. It may have an old cover over it, maybe not. If it's a drilled well that has, it's a 4 to 6 inch pipe sticking out of the ground, it's either PVC or more likely an older well will be steel or iron. Sometimes people take a Folgers can and put over top of it. Well, that eventually rusts away. We see cases where people throw things down those nice holes that are in the ground. But they're definitely a potential source of contamination and also a safety hazard for a person or animals. And if you have an old well on your property that you're not using, it isn't properly covered, you could be responsible whether someone's on your property legally or not. If they fall in and get hurt, or if it contaminates an aquifer, you may be contaminating the water your neighbors will be using down the road. And so it's best to properly seal those and properly abandon those. Most states have a guidelines or a code on how that's done. There's also sometimes efforts locally, like through a soil water conservation district, to cost share abandoning those wells, so it's not as expensive, just because of the protection it provides and the safety it provides for folks and an aquifer. And here's some examples. Both of these pictures, again, are from the Washington State Department of Ecology, from their blog. One, they're pulling a horse out of an old well that had fallen in it. And the one below, a gentleman was walking in his backyard, had no idea there was an old well there, fell in 45 feet. Someone knew it. I don't know if it was, I don't remember the story exactly, but they pulled him out and he walked away. Very, very fortunate, and which is why these should be filled in and sealed properly, so that those risks aren't there. And these newspaper clippings, back in the 90s and early 2000s, Illinois had a position for a groundwater protection educator. And this was a person who went statewide, worked with schools, all these things, to educate people about groundwater and wells. That position was cut, and the gentleman's name was Harry Hendrickson, and he gave me a lot of his materials. And this is some of the newspaper clippings that he'd had, because in the 90s, you didn't know what was going on everywhere in the country by looking at your phone. Everything was done by newspaper. There really weren't all these media channels online. And so people didn't realize in Galesburg that somebody had died in Buffalo Grove, and all those things around the state. So it happened more, and it does happen more than people realize. It just doesn't always make the news. And so you need to take care of any wells you have on your property that aren't being used and get those filled in. So as far as basic well care, our recommendation, if you're not, you don't have the wherewithal, most of us don't, to use a licensed well driller or pump installer contractor when doing work on your well. It's a way to ensure they're licensed. They have to take tests to keep their license. They have to go to continuing education classes. They're the folks that, this is their job and they understand what all the issues are. And so when you have a problem, you should try to use one of those folks. That said, some people do have the wherewithal and manage their own system. They understand, they're very handy, all those things. And so really it's about being in the know as far as what the rules are. Like I said, every state but two has a well construction code. This is just an example, it's Minnesota's. Everyone's a little different, but most are very similar. Some allow different kinds of pipe, or maybe require a certain set aside distance or whatever it might be. And so it may be a little bit different in each state, but they're very similar. And understanding those rules and ensuring that, especially if you're gonna have a well put on your property, that the driller follows all of those and you're up on all those things is just good basic practice. Your well is an investment. Depending on where you live, it could be anywhere from $8,000 or $10,000 to upwards of $50,000 or $60,000 to put in a new well. And so it's not something to do lightly and not be, to do your prep work to understand what goes into that. It's like one thing I tell well owners, if you're gonna install a well, make sure the contract you have with the driller has in it that you get the construction log and all the information about how it was developed, what the water's levels were, if it was pumped, what the flow rate was, all that information. It's important to know that, and sometimes it's not provided to you, and it may be difficult to get later. So as far as basic well care, really there's not a lot to do to your well. If it's properly constructed and it's properly sealed at the surface, and it met all the requirements, then you can. It's always good to look, especially if you have a PVC well, make sure no one's hit it with a mower and cracked it. Those things, if you have a crack in your PVC casing, it could let surface water in and bacteria, and it should be elevated. Most states have a rule, and I know this picture's from Manitoba, but it was a really nice well picture, so I used it. But some states it's 12 inches or maybe 18 or 24 inches, and that's in case your well is in a lower area and you have, one of these really strong storms that we seem to have these days, and all of a sudden you have 3 or 4 inches of water ponding or more in a low area on your property. Is to make sure that your well casing is above that, and there's no chance of water going over top of your well. That's, earlier I mentioned wells in a floodplain. If that's a risk, then your well casing should be high enough that that's not going to be a problem. Most caps have a screen and a vent for atmospheric pressure issues, and so you want to make sure that if there is a vent on your well cap, that it does have a screen to keep out bugs. It's usually very fine mesh. Yeah, it needs to be accessible. I've actually, I've been to a lot of wells in Illinois for either measuring water levels or taking samples or a number of other things for projects we've done. I've actually found wells in basements, in under garages, or in areas where they built something around it, and there's no way that someone's going to be able to do any maintenance on the well like a contractor if they can't get over top of it. Especially if your pump is submersible and it's in the well. But even if not, if you have a jet pump, for instance, you still need access. And so to make sure that's all done, the annulus is the area when you drill a well, you may put in a 5-inch casing, but the hole you drilled may be 7 1/8 or 7 3/4 or something like that. So the area outside the casing but inside the borehole has to be filled, and you fill it with material that won't allow water to flow through. So usually it's a cement or a clay grout, it's called. And that material then seals around the well so that you don't have any risk of things from the surface going down along the well casing and getting down. Like in this case, this is down to where the water's being pulled out of the well. But also you can inspect for potential sources, meaning, we find people have their dog tied up to their well, or it's right next to a building where they're storing all their pesticide and chemical for their farm operation. You shouldn't have anything near the well regardless, just as a matter of due diligence. Most states, again, I'm gonna use Minnesota, I like this diagram, have rules on setbacks, meaning if you put in a well, it's got to be so far away from all these other things. And this is just an example. Every state has different rules. I know some states require your septic system to be 100 feet away. Some say 75 feet away. But there's a lot of things that can affect water quality. And where this really becomes an issue is when your well is shallow, or it's getting water from a shallow aquifer, or where the surface geology and the surface soils are really sandy, where there's a lot more infiltration. We have areas where, like areas along major river valleys, typically are very sandy. There's a lot of irrigation. Well, those wells are typically using shallow sand, a sand aquifer that's shallow and allows a lot of infiltration. So anything near the well has more potential to actually get down into the aquifer and be pulled up by your pump, versus, where I'm at right here in Champaign County in Illinois, the aquifer that most private well owners use doesn't even start until nearly 150 feet below land surface. There's a lot of glacial till and clay above that. And so as long as the well's properly installed and grouted, there's very little risk of any surface contamination getting down into the aquifer. It's just, so geology matters as well. And here's just the bottom half of that diagram. This is just to mention and point out that there's a lot of things that can potentially be an issue. You just need to be aware of the surroundings around your well, and where you're going to place your well matters. As far as septic systems, they're obviously a potential source for well contamination. There's a setback distance, which I just mentioned, and you need to understand how your septic or your on-site system works. This is an image from Texas A&M, but it shows a two-compartment septic tank where water comes from your house, from your toilet, shower, sink, all that stuff. It goes into the first tank where most of the solids settle out, and then, or there's things that are floating, and then there's a baffle that keeps things that get it to the other side. Well, the bacteria in our bodies get into this, are in this tank, they break things down. And so as they break that all down, then the water, as that tank fills up, then moves out into the absorption field, or and so then it goes out into the soil, where microbes in the soil and the ground break it down further. It's a natural system, and when put in the right type of soils and geology, they work great naturally. They can last, we see septic systems that last, 75 or 100 years. But there's a lot of things that can affect that. And so we're going to talk about some of those things, because it's really important to make sure your tank doesn't get too full. Those solids, as they build up, will eventually work their way into the second tank and then get into the perforated pipe in your drain field. And if that happens, it's going to get clogged up and not work properly. And that's where the problem comes in. So as far as the to-do list for septic maintenance, make sure that the area around your tank and your drain field is only has grass. No trees, concrete, asphalt, don't drive over it. You need to be able to use your inspection port and manhole if you have a tank that has both of those. so that someone can take a look and determine when, how full it might be. You should try to reduce the flow of water into your system. Again, when water flows into your septic system, the bacteria that are in the tank break that down, all that material, food waste and everything else, our waste. But if you're running a ton of water through it, it doesn't have time to do any of that, and it doesn't work as efficiently. You shouldn't have a sump pump that runs into it, or a whirlpool, or softeners. It's just a lot of water coming in at once, especially in the softener case. I know there's some controversy over if that's hard on a septic system or bad for it and the bacteria in there or not. But for sure, reducing the flow is always a good idea. And your tank should be sized based on the size of your home, but that's not always the case, or people build additions or those sorts of things. One of the biggest things you can do is only put wastewater into your septic system. Don't put anything down your toilet or your sink, no man-made stuff, paint or pills or anything else. You put your child was on antibiotics and you have some left over, that kills bacteria. So you wouldn't want to put that into your septic. And the same with garbage disposals. They break things up, but they're also, it's too much solid for bacteria to break down. And so typically most of the stuff, whether it's eggshells or carrots or vegetables, whatever, that stuff ends up in the bottom of your septic tank and doesn't get broken down. And the rule of thumb is if you currently need to pump your septic system every 3 years, you would cut that time in half if you're using a garbage disposal. And in general, they're just not considered a good idea if you're on a septic. You can inspect your tank regularly and to measure solids. If that's not something you want to do, you can have someone come and do it. If you've never had your septic tank pumped, then it'd be a good idea to have someone come out and do that and measure the solids, and then have them come back maybe a year later just to measure the amount of solids in your tank, so you can get an idea of how often it needs to be pumped if you don't know. There are folks who put additives in their septic tank, yeast or other things that are commercially available. If you're doing all the right things to maintain and only put natural material in your tank, none of those things are necessary. It's a natural system. It should work fine. I've had folks email me and say, well, I haven't pumped my septic tank in 20 years. And my comment back to them is, just wait. Pretty soon it's going to get clogged up. Maybe your drain field will get clogged, and then you're going to be designing an entire new system somewhere on your property. And where you can see those things start to happen, or where you might have a problem, is if you see where your drain field is, or just quote downstream of your septic tank, you start to see much greener grass, or it's softer. That means it's not actually going down into the soil like it's supposed to. It's staying up near the surface, and it's affecting your yard. The worst thing that can happen is eventually it gets completely plugged, and then things back up into your home. And so it's a real thing. And 20% of the U.S. population is on septic tanks or on on-site wastewater systems. And so it's something, if you have one, you need to take care of it. One of the best resources, well, there's actually, I'll mention another one at the end here. The EPA has a complete website based on septic systems and decentralized systems called, it's just septic. It's epa.gov/septic. I was getting confused here because they have a program called Septic Smart we talk about a lot, and it's usually there's Septic Smart Week. It's in September. I'm using an old picture here, but this website has all kinds of resources to help you understand your tank, your system, or some other system if you're getting ready to install a new treatment system, a septic system, on how that all works and what you need to know and all that stuff. You You can learn about septic systems. It's got all kinds of information about the types of systems, how they all work. There's toolkits and outreach materials for those that work with homeowners that have septic systems. There's just a ton of information available here, and every year they add more to this and create new materials that are relevant for some of the changes in the industry that are going on as far as new types of systems or more advanced systems that maybe remove nitrogen or other things that we don't want to discharge into the environment. Related to drinking water, they have this one little video and diagram that shows how it can affect things. This is showing groundwater flow direction. And even though the well's on one side of the house and the septic field and septic tank and drain field on the other side of the house, if the wastewater is not properly treated in the soil and it gets to either the water table or a shallow aquifer, it could eventually end up affecting your well. And if everything's done right, all the material's broken down before it gets that far, but it's why you need to test and understand those things. As far as advanced systems, there's a lot of information on here about those. There's a lot going on in this world, if you will. And so it's best to just take a look if you're interested. They also have a bunch of webcasts that they put together. Some of these are older, but a lot of them are due to the Decentralized Wastewater MOU, which is a group of organizations like RCAP and NAURA and Rural Water and you name it, WEF, that all together have agreed to put out resources that are available then to homeowners and others, all free, to support education and outreach related to on-site systems. I do want to mention NAURA, the National On-Site Wastewater Recycling Association. They're a leader in on-site systems. They are a partner on a grant that we're on through RCAP as well. But a year or two ago, they developed this on-site wastewater treatment system user guide, and you can just Google that and you can find it. It's a really great document that explains everything you want to know about on-site systems, terminology, types of systems, all in one guide. It's a PDF you can download. It really talks about, especially alternative systems. If you want to use the effluent for, alternative systems, things like these aerobic units, or if you're trying to remove certain things like nitrogen, or if you want to have a wetland as an end all for your wastewater treatment. And so, as well as, troubleshooting guide in the end related to some of the advanced systems you have and issues you have for things like freezing, if you're in a cold climate, all that sort of stuff. But it's a really useful tool you can download. We can probably put the URL in our notes here as well. So moving on up to testing. So we recommend that you test your well annually for coliform nitrate, and then anytime the well's been opened or there's any noticeable change in taste, odor, or color, we also recommend you sample every 3 to 5 years for inorganics and metals, just as to help you understand the water quality in your well or your aquifer. So as far as what you test for, it really depends on your situation. If you have a shallow well versus a deeper well, the formation, the geologic formation your well's water's coming from. And if you don't know, you need to talk to your state resource agency that may have your well log. And if you can find that or know the depth, or contact the driller that installed the well or the pump installer that put the pump in, they may have information about the type of well you have, whether it's a bedrock well or a sand and gravel well or a large diameter bored well. Then you can contact your state resource agency, like a state geological survey, and ask them, my well's 150 feet deep. I'm at this location. It's a sand and gravel well. Do you know anything about the water quality? And more times than not, they're going to have some information about that aquifer, unless it's a very small, not very extensive formation. And so if someone calls us, we have water quality data for most of the aquifers in Illinois and have an idea for different areas, what constituents they can expect to find when they put a well in, like if they're putting in a new home or whatever. You should ask your county or local health district or state health department for advice. They may have information about certain constituents that are naturally occurring. You should also consider if you're near anything that might be a potential source, if you're next door to a gas station or some other type of facility where there may have been spills or those sorts of things. And ask your neighbors, ask a driller that's local, ask extension and the state well records folks, as I mentioned. They may all have some idea of things that might be going on in that area. And again, we mentioned sample for coliform and nitrate annually because they indicate a pathway into your well. Coliform isn't the bacteria that causes health issues, it's E. coli, and nitrate is fairly ubiquitous in a shallow environment. And so you should not have elevated nitrate in your well. And so what we recommend testing for these two things, it's fairly reasonable cost and it's fairly easy to do. Because if you do find elevated nitrate or coliform bacteria, it indicates that there may be a surface source that can get into your well, or there's some shallow source that's getting into your well water. And that could mean a number of things. Either your well's not properly sealed, or the well cap isn't properly connected, or there's some kind of breach in your well. Some examples of what I tell well owners is you need to be a little bit of an investigator, find out if your state or local health folks or resource agencies have any information on water quality related to your area. Massachusetts DEP has this nice tool on their website related to arsenic and uranium because there's a lot of it in the state. And so you can type in your address and it'll tell you if you're at risk of one or both of those things. And then they also provide information there, like for testing labs and that kind of information. So it's really useful, and they're just trying to provide a service to the residents in their state. And you don't know when you might find out that there's some contaminant that you don't expect. So this is Rhode Island. All the little dots are where there used to be orchards, and they know there's arsenic contamination because of arsenic being used as a pesticide on orchards until the early 60s. But the big splotch in the middle, the third of the state there, is where there's naturally occurring beryllium in some of the groundwater systems there. And that's not something that I would ever have imagined as an issue. But it turns out beryllium does cause health problems, and it has an MCL, which I'll talk about that in the questions, but it's regulated. Community water supplies have to make sure beryllium's below a certain level. And so we would recommend well owners also do the same. But I show this image because it's an example of why you need to go look and see if there might be certain constituents that normally we wouldn't recommend anyone test for beryllium. But if they're in Rhode Island, I certainly would, just because of this information that we found. And some states have more advanced tools available. The state of Wisconsin, their regulatory agency for private wells and water systems, community water systems, is DNR, Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. They've taken all the private well samples they've collected and put them in this nice GIS framework. So you can see I searched for arsenic by county, and it's showing me the areas where the health standard for arsenic is 10 parts per billion, or micrograms per liter. And so everything in yellow, orange, or red there is above 10. And the 3 red counties near Green Bay indicate that the average sample they've collected is over 21 parts per billion. This doesn't say anything about how many samples have been collected and what that's based on. You can see some of the counties, like the county where Duluth is, are clear, which means they don't have any data for that county. And this image as well is a number of years old. But what it tells me is if I'm going to move to the Green Bay area and I want to buy a house that may have a private well, I'm going to test it for arsenic first, or find out if the current homeowner has tested or if they have treatment for arsenic, because it's treatable. It's not like it's a deal breaker. It's a matter of understanding what your water quality is. And so we are starting to see more and more of these kind of tools available online. And it's really useful as a homeowner with a well to have access to some of this information. So what we recommend, and again, we try to develop a set of general recommendations that are for a national audience, so it doesn't have some of those specifics, is that you test for coliform and nitrate annually, as I've already explained, and then every 3 to 5 years test for this other list of constituents. They really give you a good idea of the chemistry. They're the more common problems you might have. Yeah, and if you have a home that has either lead pipes because it's older, or galvanized pipes that are older, or even copper pipes with lead solder, which is any home built prior to 2014, then we recommend you certainly sample for lead, because that's a home plumbing issue. It's not a natural groundwater issue. But again, you should get advice from your local or health district or county health department, as well as state health department. Those folks are there to help you. Send them an email, figure out on their website how you can contact them, and make sure that you're sampling for the things that are appropriate for your area. As far as getting it analyzed, every state accredits labs for testing for drinking water, because those labs test all the community water supplies that have to it's mandatory to test every 3 months to stay in compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. So you can find a list of those labs under the State Resource Agency, or I should say the State Primacy Agency that regulates all the community water supplies in your state. Other states may have additional programs for private well sampling. You can look into that online. There aren't very many. I know Iowa has a grants to counties program where the state legislature provides funds to the county health departments, where they can then use that to subsidize sampling or even well abandonment, depending on what the county's priorities are. But you may be able to get a lower cost test if you're in Iowa. There's other programs that are kind of unique, like New Mexico has a program where if you identify your septic system for them and give them all the information they need so they can add it to the registry, they'll give you a free water sample. So there's, you just have to look. Most of the time you're on your own. That's just the way it is. I mean, you have a private well, you don't have a water bill, that's part of it. And that said, if you are a private well owner, it's a mechanical system, as I mentioned, eventually you'll have some issue. And so paying yourself a water bill and putting that money away for a rainy day is always a good idea. When you go to a lab, though, you need to give them detailed instructions, or I'm sorry, they should be able to give you detailed instructions. So they should be able to send you a kit, tell you if you need to preserve the sample or how to store it if it's on ice or whatever, even provide you the return cooler or box and a label to ship it to them if that's possible, or where to take it back to them if it's close by, and how soon they need the samples back. For bacteria, it's within 48 hours, I believe. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Had no idea that was on. Anyway, they should be able to answer all your questions. So when they ask, when you have questions, if they can't answer them, then I'd find another lab. That's my advice, because they should be able to have someone that understands your situation as a well owner and be able to provide you what you need. Yeah. So, and I think in the questions I answered more about how to find a lab and that information. And so we'll get to that when we get to the questions. As far as interpreting your results, you'll get a set of results sent to you. There are things, and I'll show you one online that you can go to where you can type in all the information and it'll tell you whether it's over an MCL and some of the basic information. But we still always recommend you go to your local health department or health district or a health professional to get a qualified answer on your sampling results. It may be something that's not considered a health risk for for the general public, but it may be something that it might affect you, like sodium may be really high, for instance, or whatever it might be. And so it's always good to get a qualified answer. And a lot of times we'd recommend if you found something in your well and it wasn't expected, as far as if it's something that is considered out of the ordinary, to resample to confirm. It could have just been an error in the lab. And if you've sampled for coliform bacteria, then you should have an E. coli test performed. And you should boil your water until you can chlorinate it, disinfect your well and your well water and your water system, and then retest and ensure that you've actually eliminated that threat. In some cases, shot chlorinating your well may not solve your problem. And I'm going to address that later as well. Generally, that works. There are times when it may not. So you should not start drinking the water right after you chlorinate your well. If you do that, you need to retest and make sure it worked first. This is the website I mentioned I was going to show you. This was developed by the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. They had funding from CDC to develop this. It's actually a really cool tool. And again, it gives guidance, and it's meant for the residents of New Hampshire, to be honest, but they've made it available publicly. And so it's really, you can be accessed by anyone. And there's actually, this tool was so well received that now there are 8 or 9 states, I believe, that have a version of this all at one central location, so that folks in other areas can get more directed information for their state. But when you click on the green box down here, enter your water well test results, it takes you to a page where you can do that. Up at the top, it asks you which New Hampshire town or city you're from. You can say anonymous if you don't want to share. But then I typed in 15 micrograms per liter, which is also parts per billion, which the standard's 10. And so I didn't put anything else in, but whenever I do that, I get the red X that says arsenic is, which is 0.015 milligrams per liter, and the standard's 0.01, which is 10 ppb. And so the nice thing, I'm going to go back. The nice thing about this tool that's different is some of these tools require you to put it in milligrams per liter. So you have to convert that on your own. You take the 15 and, it'd be 0.0015, I believe. 0.015, sorry. Yeah. Anyway, this allows you to use the units that you got your results in, which aren't always standard, even though they probably should be. And so it's really handy. Just doing the math sometimes causes problems. If you take our 10 lesson private well class, one of the pre-test questions asks you to convert from one unit to another. And the first, 2,000 people or so that took our class, only 27% got that right. And it's just something we do every day. Many of us haven't had math since high school or college, so it's good to have this feature on here. The other thing it does is the bottom half of this image, it tells you what kind of treatment actually works for this particular contaminant. So if you have arsenic, it's a point of use arsenic absorptive media system or an RO or reverse osmosis unit. Those are the typical treatment approaches to use for arsenic. And if we put in all the other constituents that might have been in this particular water sample, it may give you a little different result as far as what kind of treatment you want to use, because you may be removing multiple things, that sort of thing. But it's really handy that it gives you an idea of what kind of treatment you should have had. And as you go down the page, it talks about treatment options, all those things. It's important to make sure that any treatment device you purchase meets the standards that are listed here under treatment options, NSF ANSI standard 53 or 58, depending on which type of system it is. That means it's been tested by a third-party certifier to actually remove what it's supposed to remove. So if it's stamped with a Water Quality Association Gold Seal, which is a third-party certifier, or a National Sanitation Foundation, NSF, or what's the third one? UL, Underwriter's Lab. Then for removing arsenic, then you know it's been tested and it'll actually do the work it's supposed to do. That's important because when you look at costs for some of these devices, they may range all over the map from, you know, $50 to $2,000. And I guarantee you all the ones on the low end will not have one of those seals attached to it, those symbols. Whereas the ones that have been certified, you know, it costs more money, but you're getting what you pay for. So anyway, and again, what I just showed you, the Be Well Informed tool from New Hampshire is only a guide for typical water. Again, you should still take your sample to your local health department or state health department or a health professional so they can evaluate it as well. And, you know, there are a few places in the country, you know, one or two local health districts, I know one in Connecticut, maybe one in New York, where they have the authority to basically tell you can't drink your water. But everywhere else, you know, like in Illinois, all the county health departments, they're trying to protect your health, but they can't tell you can't drink your water or condemn your well. They may recommend you don't drink it. Or, you know, we've had cases here where we have arsenic that's over 150 parts per billion. And I've recommended those folks talk to their county health department. And the county is like, you know, you really shouldn't be drinking this, especially with kids. But in the end, it's your choice as a well owner what you choose to drink. But it's good to know and be informed. And so, you know, we certainly would recommend you add treatment to a situation like that. But I also run into folks who say, well, I've drank this my whole life. And, you know, they're not going to change their way. And that's, you know, that's a shame, but it's their right. So it's one of the things about being a private well owner. As far as treatment, you know, a lot of times people treat not for health issues, but because they don't like the smell or the taste. And so they put in a unit that helps with that. You know, you shouldn't just add treatment for the sake of adding treatment. You need to test first. I ran into a well owner up in Northern Illinois who had all of this treatment in his basement, you know, probably at least $5,000 to $7,000 worth of treatment. And he had the money to do that. And first question I had was, well, what did you have in your well water that you needed to add all this treatment? He goes, well, we never treated it. We never tested it. We just decided to add this to be safe. That's certainly his choice. But for most of us, spending that kind of money is something we should do with informed information, with actual information that shows you need it. Because well water, in some cases, it's perfectly fine without any kind of treatment. It meets all the MCLs, it tastes fine, all those things. And, you know, bottom line is you need to do what is best for you. But if it's not necessary, there's probably other ways you could use those resources. And one thing I want to mention, I think I'm going to mention it again, is that rarely, if ever, will you need a whole house purification system. And I mean that for like RO or some advanced treatment to remove something that's actually a constituent. You know, in the case of arsenic, someone may have you consider getting a whole house RO unit. It's a huge waste of water. It's a huge waste of money. Arsenic is not a threat for your skin or for breathing in vapors or whatever from the shower. It's only a risk for drinking. And so if you have arsenic in your well water, the best thing to do is install an under your sink kitchen faucet type of unit. It's, you know, a tenth of the cost and a tenth of the maintenance cost, and it's what makes sense. And yeah, like I said, rarely would you need whole house purification. You know, I'm not talking about basic things like people who have turbidity or iron may have a filter that when they come into their home, or, you know, you have a water softener that treats all your water to get it soft. Those are whole house purification too. Those things are, you know, meant for that. But I'm talking about if you collect a water sample and you find some constituent that's a health risk, you know, make sure you do your due diligence to understand whether you need more than something like under your kitchen sink for treatment. Yeah, and so I left this in here. There are very few cases. I think I just basically provided this answer. And so, yeah, I'm gonna go past that. Yeah, I'd ask why. That's the big thing. If somebody says you need whole house RO, ask them why. And we'd be glad to verify that or comment on their recommendation if that happens. As far as maintenance, this is actually the biggest issue. If you are going to have even a softener, if you don't put salt in it, right? It can't regenerate, it can't do its job. Any kind of treatment device you add has maintenance. And so if you do have any kind of treatment, follow the maintenance schedule, be strict about following it. If you think, oh, it doesn't really need it, you're probably wrong. And eventually you'll get to a point where you just don't replace it. So for an example, even a paper filter, a 5-micron filter, eventually that filter will harbor bacteria. And as it fills up and the filter doesn't actually work anymore, it bypasses. Now you're adding bacteria into your system. When we first started this class in 2013, I reached out to the Minnesota Health Department and some of their groundwater and private well staff. And one of those folks had seen so many treatment devices where the treatment device ended up being the source of contamination that he suggested we don't even include treatment as part of our 10-lesson class. That people are better off, in his experience, not having treatment because they don't take care of it. We obviously decided that that's not giving everybody the information they need. And so that's why this slide's so important. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about our private well class. Our webpage is just privatewellclass.org. And this is an old picture, which I forgot to change because there's now 2 buttons here, and I'll show you that at the end. If you go to our webpage now, there's a button that says take a free class, and the other one says visit our help center. But you sign up here by take a free class, and it sends you a PDF once a week for 10 weeks. These webinars are not the private well class lessons. They are meant to support them. And so if you've not taken our 10-lesson class, we recommend you do that. It's completely free. We need an email address so we can send them to you. We ask for your first name just to be personable, and where you live, you click that's a drop down. It's which state you live in. And that's really to show RCAP and EPA that our program is reaching folks nationwide. And so you click on the class lessons every 7 days. If you're a professional, you can click on Outreach Partnership, and we'll get you some information about things that we provide that you can share with well owners in your area. But sign up for the class. We end up with a lot of folks who are on our webinars who haven't taken the class. It's a good resource either way. They're PDFs, you can keep them. They go into a lot more detail than we can go in today on all the topics we've talked about so far. Along with that, on our website under the resource library, for each of the 10 lessons, the first one's called The Science of Groundwater, we list a lot of other resources that we either use to help write these lessons, or that provided images for it, or figures, or that we just feel are useful and may describe things in a way that's a little different. The private well class was written as like you're talking to a well owner. It's more conversational in that way, and that might not resonate with everyone. And so there's a lot of good information in these additional resources, and they get used a lot. Under our webinars and events, we haven't put any of our upcoming webinars on here. This is the last. We do this like every 3 or 4 months. And so today's webinar is the last one for the upcoming, but all the old webinars are listed, and there's a recording and a link to those. We do these every month. We have for, wow, nine years or so, probably, maybe longer. And so all of those are available to you on our YouTube channel or on our webpage. We've done a few special webinars, like this one on lead. The last time we did it was in 2018, but that's because this is after all the Flint stuff happened, and there's a lot more talk about lead. We had an expert from Virginia Tech at the time, Dr. Kelsey Piper, who helped present this material on the work she's done, looking at private wells and homes with lead pipes and copper pipes with lead solder. And so we went through, there's a lot of good information here. And we haven't done one since. We did two. We did one in 2016 and one in 2018, because really everything a well owner needs to know is here. And it's yeah, and if you have questions, we recommend you just watch the webinar. But then if you have questions, let us know. We can help you however we can. Same thing with funding and financing. We do this once every a year and a half or so. The honest situation is that there's very little funding available for private well owners for replacing a pump, getting a new well, all those things. There's a few programs out there. The biggest one is from USDA through the Farm Bill, and there's a number of groups, including RCAP, their regional affiliates, that can provide those loans or grants, but the income restrictions are pretty tight. They're currently 60% of the poverty level in your area, which doesn't provide a lot of opportunity for most well owners, but it does help a few. And so they're looking at options to expand that, or maybe change those rules with the new Farm Bill. We hope that happens. I know they're asking that it potentially just be at the poverty level, not at 60% of it, and that will open this up for more folks. But there's other things in here about, subsidies for testing or abandoning wells, all those sorts of things. It's worth going through and understanding. We actually had the folks from USDA that run that program on this webinar, and so we haven't delivered it since last February. We also have a series of short videos, training videos that are 4 to 6 minutes long. They're meant to talk about one specific topic and give you information there. And this one's on sharing your well. We did get a question this month about shared wells, and so I'd point you to this video first. As I recall, yeah, I think I answered this later, so I'll get to that then. But there's a lot of issues with things like shared wells, because a lot of times there's no agreement. It's just a handshake, and everything's fine until a pump fails, and all of a sudden you and your neighbor, or 2 neighbors or 3 neighbors, have to agree on spending $4,000 to have a pump replaced, and one of them doesn't want to pay for it. It makes neighbors who maybe have been friends for a long time not so friendly anymore. It may put people at risk of not having a water supply if the person who owns the land where the well is decides they're not going to share anymore. There's a lot of issues to consider if you're going to use a shared well. Similarly, why does my well keep losing pressure? This is, again, just one of these. There's 21 of these, I think, now. The other one related to this, how does my pressure tank work, is by far our most popular help video. It's had well over 400,000 views since 2016. And it just speaks to people with low water pressure and not understanding how their pressure switch works or their pressure tank works, and what things can be done to change some of those things, or if it's losing pressure, why. And so they're really helpful. Like I said, they're targeted. They're about one thing. There's other ones like on what to do after a fire. So if you live in an area, a rural area where there's been a forest fire and it's damaged your well, what do you do? If it's been inundated by flood and overtopped by flood water, all those sorts of videos are available through our website. We also started a few years ago a podcast called Tap Talk, the Drinking Water in Rural America podcast. These are some of the private well related ones that we've had. Brian Swistock is retired now, but he was at Penn State Extension, and I think most folks that I work with around the country would agree that he's probably the most knowledgeable private well person we've all ever met. It's a great loss when he retired, actually. But there's, so it's a great conversation with these folks. Dr. Wolf is at Boston Children's Hospital. He's the head of pediatrics at Harvard Medical School, and he deals with situations where children have, I'd say, obscure health issues, because it ends up being sometimes private well water. And so he's very much an advocate and very interested in some of those issues. So it's really interesting. These are just interesting folks to talk to. We're up to episode about 42 or 43 now. We're in the middle of season 4. Half of these are private well related. The other half are more towards water or even wastewater systems, small systems that we work and serve. So it's kind of at the intersection of all of those things, and private and public health, and that's the focus. So I mentioned our webpage was out of date that I showed there a minute ago, and here's what the bottom half here, what our webpage looks like today. It says visit the help center. That's the second button we've added. And it's because we've started a private well hotline. So it's meant to be a national help center to help meet the needs of well owners and multiple, so we provide multiple methods for you to find information. And so it's not only a phone number, but it's also a knowledge base, if you will, a database of information where you can ask questions, and also a chat feature that uses an AI that we've basically educated ourselves internally using all the information from our class and from our webinars. And so it's all our own materials, so it's consistent. And Sally, who you met earlier when she did the poll question, is managing that system for us. And she's on the webinar today if anybody has any questions about that. But when you click on that, go to the Help Center, it comes to this page. And there's 3 ways to contact us. You can call us, the number at the top there that goes right to Sally, or one of our other staff who may be working on it that day or be online. You can search the knowledge base, which these boxes here list the number of articles, which are basically answers to questions on specific topics. You can start typing in a topic and you'll get a response that tells you, here's the articles that we have questions and answers for. Or you can click on the little button that's at the bottom and get to this chat bot. And what it does is it takes all the knowledge base materials, and depending on how you word your question, it gives you an answer that's specific to the question you ask. And so it's really cool. We just launched it. It'll get better as it goes, because as more people ask questions, we'll be able to tailor things to what we're seeing. We do have all the questions you all ask on our webinars and have for years, and we use that to help figure out which things we should put in here first. On a typical month, we get between 30 and 60 questions, which we answer 10 to 15 of those. And so we've tried to use all of that information to build this kind of in an intelligent way that will allow folks who maybe don't want to talk on the phone, would rather try to find an answer themselves, to at least look at the information we can provide for the help. We're always welcome, especially me as an older person, to talk to you. I'd much rather talk to someone on the phone and be able to ask questions as we go, but this is an option, and maybe get you started till you get to your specific problem and have those issues. So the overall program we have, including these webinars and the class lessons and all of that stuff, is to help you understand what you need to know about your well. You need to understand your well log. If you can find it, a lot of people can't, but if you have a well log or your state has a well log, you should get a copy of it. Know it's there, where your water's coming from, how deep it is, where the pump's set if it's in the well. Does it have a screen or not? It does if it's a sand and gravel well, likely. Doesn't if it's a bedrock well. All those things matter as far as understanding where your water's coming from and all that stuff. To know if there's natural occurring contaminants or any other water quality issues associated with the aquifer where you're getting your water, or if is it just the water table and it's a shallow water that infiltrates in the ground. That's a whole nother set of issues. But by going through this information and learning the basics of private well ownership and stewardship, and how water flows through the ground and how it gets into your well and what common contamination issues there are, all of those things will make it much better for you in one, solving your own problems if you have one with your well or your water, or it'll help you ask better questions when you do need to reach out to a local source of information. And so it'll help the conversation, because then those folks realize that you know something about your well, because we do run into a lot of people who really know nothing about their well. We've heard stories from water operators who are running a community water supply when they've issued a boil order that private well owners will call them and ask them if that's going to affect their well water, which has nothing to do with that. It's totally a different issue. And so the more you know, the better off you are. It's something to take seriously. It's your well and your drinking water source. And then lastly, why you need to sample your well regularly. And that can't be said enough. And it's estimated that 2/3 of all the well owners in the country have never tested their well water. And that's just taking a risk that you don't need to. And again, so then our goal, I guess, if you will, is to help well owners understand why their well is important, why they should understand how it works, and how to help protect themselves and their family from risk. So we got over 40 questions this time. And when you registered, you were able to ask questions, which we're going to go through some of those now. And again, if you have a question about anything that we've said today, or if it doesn't come up in the questions that we answer here, you're free to go to the question box or the chat box on your GoToWebinar window and ask a question. And we're tracking those and we'll pull them up at the end. So I guess I just said that. So more on sampling. So where can I send my water sample to be tested? So I mentioned that you can go to an EPA certified lab in your state. All you need to do is go to Google or whatever browser you use and type in EPA certified labs. The certification of laboratories that analyze drinking water will come up. And when you click on that, you get to this page on EPA's website. And if you scroll down that page, you get to this list of state certification programs and certified labs. You can click on your state, or you can go to the drop down and click on your state, and it'll give you a link to the page. Like in Illinois, that's the Illinois EPA has a web page where they list, it's actually a document or an online search feature. They list all the labs that are certified to do testing in Illinois. Now, those include labs in Illinois and labs in many other states that have sought to get approval to be a testing agent for community water supplies in their state. But it'll give you a list of those labs that you might want to go to, and you can find the ones that are closest to you that way. And we recommend you would always use a certified lab, because that means they've gone through the testing and the criteria to ensure that the work they do meets the EPA's requirements for testing, and that they are using the right methods and all those things, and they're doing things in the right way. So how often should I shock my well with chlorine? So you should only disinfect your well with chlorine when it needs it. And that's, you don't know if it needs it unless you've sampled and you found bacteria. So disinfection kills bacteria. It doesn't do anything for anything else, arsenic or anything else. In fact, too much chlorine can release metals into the water. It's an oxidant. And so you don't want to just mix chlorine and, or you don't want to just put in chlorine to shock your well on a regular schedule. Couple things to know, this document at the bottom, well and water system disinfection for private wells, we looked at many, probably over 70 different documents that are out there on how to shock chlorinate your well. This is the one that we chose to share because we think it's very useful. It talks about all the things that are important. It takes you step by step through the process, like why you mix the chlorine instead of pouring straight bleach. Because it's an oxidant, you pour straight bleach into your well, it can cause metals to leach off the pipe or off your pump. And so you mix it up at a certain concentration so that then you can disinfect not only your well, but all the water lines going to and in your home. And so it's a whole process. If someone's having you just put bleach in your well, you're not, one, you're not protecting yourself from bacteria, and two, it's not going to get rid of any bacteria that are in your system if there is. So this is just one of the pages there. It talks about understanding how much water to use and why you mix the chlorine in 5-gallon buckets with water so you keep the concentration at the right level, and even what to do with your treatment devices. And we have this on our webpage. Oh, I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna go back to here. I showed lesson 1 and lesson 2, all those additional resources that are available. Under lesson 10, this document's available under water treatment solutions. And so you can get to it there. As far as shot chlorination though, there are some times where it doesn't work, or you shot chlorinate your well, even if you've done it the right way, and you still have a positive bacteria hit. So there's a number of reasons for that. One is that you could have a buildup of bacteria. You know, if your well hasn't been, or your water system hasn't been chlorinated ever, and it's 30 years old, you more than likely have biofilm somewhere in your system. It's just the way it is. There's a lot of natural bacteria in groundwater. And so when you chlorinate that the first time or shot chlorinate it, you might just kill the upper layer of that biofilm, but not all of it. And so it may take 2 or 3 times. We actually recommend that people do that. I'd try shot chlorinating at least 2 or 3 times before you give up and assume that that's another reason, because it could just be that. There could be a continuous source, which means like the example from the EPA webpage where it showed the septic system draining down into the aquifer and then moving toward the well. It could be that you have a well that's only getting water from a thin lens of sand, for instance, where water can move through it a lot more easily. And if that same thin sand layer on your property goes over to where your septic system is, it's possible that there's preferential flow, and you're causing, when you pump your well, it lowers the water level, it causes flow toward the well. You may be just connected, so to speak, to that effluent, and there's not a lot you can do there. Maybe it's a feedlot, or if you have an old dug well, it's close by. Those are likely the things that might be causing that. Or if you're on a spring instead of a well, and you have a spring box, you know, that's basically surface water. So it's almost always has bacteria and other things, you know, Giardia and all kinds of things in it. In those cases, you just have to disinfect continuously, which means, man, what is going on today? Which means you either add a chlorinator so that you're chlorinating all the water you drink, or you add a UV system so that, you know, ultraviolet disinfection to kill all the bacteria and everything else that would be part of that. And if you don't want to do that, then your other option is to put in a different well. As far as if you have a continuous source, then there's no way to stop bacteria from getting in your well when you use it. So the third thing here is we know that chlorine chemistry is such that if the water's too high of a pH, like over 8, then chlorine isn't nearly as effective as a disinfectant. It forms some other kind of ion. I don't know all the chemistry there. I know there's some research going on. We talked to Cody Chemicals in Texas. They gave us some information about that. But your water may be too high of a pH for the chlorine to really work, as far as it just doesn't disinfect and kill things. We know that some folks recommend adding vinegar, like white vinegar, to a well to lower the pH of the water while you're doing the shot chlorination. Wow. And we haven't investigated that on how well that works. It seems kind of iffy to understand how much you'd want to use just to lower the pH. And so we know there's some research going on there, and we're hoping at some point we can provide a better recommendation when that happens. But you won't know that unless you test your well water and determine that the pH is really high. If that happens, then chlorination is likely to be less effective. So you might want to consider UV. There could be other things in the water that are reacting with the chlorine that would, you know, it can only the chemical reactions that it forms that kill bacteria and stuff, there's only so much chlorine there, and it's going to use it up. And so it may require a higher dose than recommended. The bottom line is whenever you are shot chlorinating your well, when you start running that chlorinated water through the lines in your home, like at your faucets and toilets and showers, if you can't smell chlorine, that's the recommendation is you run water through until you smell chlorine, then you turn it off. That means there's chlorine in all the pipes going right to the shower head, so that it can, if there's any bacteria there, it can kill it. If you can't smell chlorine, then you probably, it's already been used up, and you might want to consider adding a higher amount. Okay, should I be concerned about PFAS? Well, we should all be concerned about PFAS, especially because it's everywhere. It's used in thousands of things. It's literally, there are traces showing up everywhere. It's in our body, it's in our clothes, in the soil, in the air. We don't understand all the health effects yet. It's just a big tenable problem. There's so many of them. I believe there's over 1,000 that have been identified. And some don't cause health effects, some don't break down, others do. And we still don't understand how all of that happens and how they move in the environment. So, and because they don't act the same way, some have different effects. We don't even have all that categorized. I say we, this is all the researchers and EPA and other folks that are working on those issues. But because of the size of the problem, there is a ton of work and investment going on in trying to figure all that out. And so, I expect PFAS to be still a big issue in 15 or 20 years, and to be quite honest, just because, it's in everything. We've used it for so many years for so many different things. Even even stopping the manufacture of products that have it in it is an undertaking that's still going on. And so it's as we understand more, those things get updated. We do know that they can be treated for, and testing is expensive right now, but that's going to change as more and more folks and more labs develop the ability to do those tests. And so what we recommend really is if you live near a known source, and airports, training centers for fire departments, where there's been a fire and the firefighting foam's been used, or any kind of chemical plant that may use those sorts of things, then you should probably test. For a rural homeowner that's not near any potential sources, unless you know of a source, it's probably not necessary. We do know that there's some communities, especially in the Northeast. We worked with one in Maine where they, as a community, they're all on private wells, but they went together and sampled a number of their wells, and a few of them did have some PFAS at low levels show up. That's most likely something that was put in either from our bodies or from put down a drain that got into their septic system and then into the natural groundwater system. That's really the one explanation that they're still working to work out. And there's people working on that too as it goes. But if you go to the EPA has a treatability database, and their Science Matters is I won't say it's a magazine, it's an email newsletter, so to speak, that they provide. You can sign up for free, but they list 3 types of treatment: activated carbon, which are the carbon filters like on a kitchen tap point of use device, ion exchange, or high pressure membranes like RO. And so there's, you'd want to talk to a treatment professional before you add those things. Some people may choose to add those treatment devices without testing. If you can actually, in some cases, depending on what the PFAS testing is going to cost, it may be cheaper for a long time anyway, just to go ahead and do that, like a point of use filter. But that's, for most things, that's not what we would recommend. But if you need these links, we can put them in the chat, or we can send them out later I forgot to give these to Katie before we started, and I know she's having an issue today with her computer. So just let us know. When is it necessary to use the reverse osmosis system? So there are actually several questions about treatment and water quality related to treating water, actually several questions about RO units specifically. And so I wanted to point out, and I'm starting to show this on every webinar because it's really that good of a document. Minnesota Department of Health, which I know I reference them a lot, it's because they have a lot of wherewithal and they put out a lot of great materials that help well owners. They developed this document called Home Water Treatment, and it really walks through what you need to know. And again, you wouldn't just put on RO because you want to treat your water. You want to test your water first and find out what you have that might require treatment, and then pick a treatment device that removes that constituent. And so just adding RO isn't necessary. It can be costly. It can change the taste of the water, and maybe you don't need to do any of that because it does remove almost everything. Not everything, but almost. And so this resource, again, if you just Google home water treatment, Minnesota Department of Health, it'll pop up as the first thing. But it's a great resource. So they walk you through step one, know where your drinking water comes from, why do you want treatment, and then if you're going to select an option, I mentioned earlier the 3 third-party certifiers that test this equipment to make sure it works like it's supposed to. Those 3 labels they have right here. Look for an NSF, National Sanitation Foundation, the Water Quality Gold Seal from Water Quality Association, or the Certified Water Quality Symbol from Underwriters Lab. Don't buy a treatment device that doesn't have one of those 3. And it may have more than one, but I know it'll have at least one of those. And you can go to their websites, and they've got a ton of information about the work they do, treatment devices, and all that sort of stuff. So, but as you go through this document, it lists, and I left these yellow boxes on here just because of some of the issues that people have. I think a few months ago we had someone ask about methane, but for any potential contaminant or issue like color, taste, or odor, it lists which devices can remove those things. Like a carbon filter, people buy carbon filters and put on their kitchen tap just because of taste sometimes, and they do a good job of removing things that cause taste issues. But as you can go through that and see, and then there's a list of each of the treatment options and what, at least as of last year, what the costs are, if you get a point of use versus point of entry, which point of use means at the kitchen tap or at wherever the point of use is. Point of entry means where it enters your home. So that would be a whole house system. So you can see the difference in cost for absorptive media. We can go through all of these. They list the pros and cons and description of what it is and what things they remove. So, I would always, if you talk to a treatment professional or someone suggests some kind of treatment device to you, I would compare it to this document before I made any decisions. So, carbon filters for color to odor and taste. RO, you can see what it removes. As I mentioned, a point of use RO unit is between $300 and $1,500. A point of entry RO unit is between $5,000 and $12,000. So just a lot more expensive. And I don't know of a case where, I asked the Minnesota Department of Health if arsenic was a dermal issue, if you took showers in it and all that thing. And they said, we don't see groundwater that would have a level where that would be an issue. It just doesn't, can't be that, there just can't be that much in groundwater we have. Certainly we've run across from folks in the States. Okay, we've had our private domestic well for 32 years and 3 other older domestic wells being used by family members and employees within a half-mile range. Would we need to have each tested separately for chemicals nitrogen assessment, or would one joint test assume all are safe or need further adjudication for safe drinking water? Well, every well is different, and because these are older wells especially, if you don't know the construction, or if the depth is the same for all of them as far as where they're at on the landscape. They might not even be tapping the same aquifer. There's just a lot of things that can be different from one well to the next. And what I put in here is, even if some developer comes in and puts in a rural subdivision and puts everybody on a private well, and they're all on the same quote block where they may be 100 feet apart or so, these wells, you should still test them each, because not only could there be construction differences, but your plumbing may be different. There may be different treatment. One of them might be softened and the others aren't. I mean, there's just a lot of issues that can cause differences from one well to another. And within a half a mile, geology can be significantly different. We have a really thick sand and gravel aquifer buried in our county. And when we were doing an assessment of that, we put in some monitoring wells to evaluate the thickness as well as test the water. We ran into a place where there's about a 4 square mile area where there was no aquifer. There was no rhyme or reason other than the bedrock was 150 feet higher there than everywhere else. And if we would have been over even a half a mile from where we drilled, we never would have figured that out, that was there. And so geology is really complicated. And when you drill a well and collect information about the geology for that borehole, it's very possible that they're not even on the same aquifer. And if that's the case, the chemistry could be really different, even the natural chemistry in the geologic unit. So you really do need to test each well. It's important to understand that water quality. And, I think you'll see when you do that, that there's going to be differences in the chemistry between all of them. Our MCL's health standards, which stands for maximum contaminant level. If so, why do they vary between states? Pennsylvania has an MCL for arsenic at 10, and New Jersey has their MCL is 5. So they are health standards, and they're required for community water supplies, public water supplies, which is community or non-community. And non-community means like a place of business that has a well, or a school. It's a place where people are getting their drinking water during the day. A factory, a rest area, all those are non-community water supplies, but they have rules through the Safe Drinking Water Act that they nationally have to meet all the primary MCLs, which for arsenic, that's 10. States, however, and every state is responsible to ensure that their community and non-community water supplies meet that. They're required to test, they have to send in their results, they have to have a licensed operator, all these rules, so that they can ensure the water they're serving to the residents in their community is safe to drink, okay? But they also then have the authority in their own state to decide if they want to make more strict standards. And that's what's happened with arsenic. So New Jersey has to make the rule at least 10 by federal law, but they have the option of making it more strict if they choose to. And I believe it's just New Jersey and New Hampshire that have adopted 5 ppb for that limit. I thought California had, but when I looked it up when I was preparing for this, everything I found said it was still 10. And I didn't do an exhaustive search or anything, so there may be others. But I know when New Hampshire passed their rule, they were the second state with New Jersey to have done that, and that was in 21. And so, like everything else, every state is a little different. Most of the rules are very similar related to drinking water quality standards, but each state is free to pass something a little more strict or to add something on. I'm sure there are states where there's something they're testing for that's required in their state code that's not required by the Safe Drinking Water Act. I think in Illinois, we added our state primacy agency, and through our state legislature and our pollution control board, added a rule that requires groundwater, oh boy, what are they called? Source water protection evaluations done. And so that's not a national law, I don't believe, but in Illinois, it's required for all the public water supplies in the state. So every state's free to do their own additional work, in other words, or make the rules a little more strict if they choose to. And so that's just, that's the way the rules are. If my well water is unsafe to drink, can I still use it for showers, toilets, animals, and plants? Well, maybe. It really depends on why it's not safe. If it's, I mentioned the example of arsenic, but really the best solution is to make it safe to drink. I don't know what the situation is for this particular question, but if you'll email us, I'd be glad to talk to you more about this. And I just need to understand what's going on in order to do that. We get questions from well owners all over the country to our phone number and our email address that are not related to these webinars. And so, we try to follow up. Well, we do follow up on every one, and we also try to find the information you need or try to hook you up with folks locally that can help you answer those questions. I mentioned the RCAP staff that are doing these water well assessments and septic assessments. Many times I'm referring well owners to them because they'll come look at your situation and try to find you support and help, and it's all free to you. It's part of the funding they get from US EPA is to provide that service to help well owners who need it. So if you'll email us, we'd be glad to talk about this further. And an hour after this webinar is over, you should get an email saying, how'd you enjoy the webinar? You can just respond to that email if you want. I think that comes directly to me. I recently had our water tested at Simple Lab, and it showed arsenic contamination at 0.0034 parts per million. My question is, do we need to do anything about this? So 0.0034 parts per million is 3.4 parts per billion. And as we've talked about a number of times today, the MCL is 10. So if this were a public water supply or the community water supply for any town in your state, they would be fine and they'd report it. And once a year, they have to report all that stuff to all the public, but it would say that it's below the health standard, the MCL for that constituent. So there are no rules for private wells. There may be some local jurisdictions that have developed some rules for what the water quality can be, but in general, most of the 23 million private wells in the country are on their own to determine what's safe and what isn't safe. And so it's a personal choice whether 3.4 is okay for you, but we would consider this safe based on the requirements for public water supplies and the guidance in the Safe Drinking Water Act. If you have any concerns related to if that's still a health issue, that's something to ask your doctor. And being honest, there's a chance that your doctor hasn't dealt anything with private wells or private well issues and may not have any additional information. We certainly hope they do, but we understand that they're dealing with a lot of different things, and even most doctors never even ask their patients where they get their water from, and we're trying to change that. If there's anyone who works with clinicians, let us know. We work hard to try to find avenues to reach out and help doctors and nurses understand why they should ask their patients that question. So our advice would be that it's below the MCL, so it's considered safe by the US EPA for drinking. If the water pressure coming out of my well is low, how do I improve it? So assuming you have a traditional pressure tank as part of your water system, then your water pressure is really based on your the high and low pressure settings that you have on your pressure tank or on your control valve for that. And so, most of those systems have a high and a low pressure. The pump kicks on when it goes down to the low pressure, let's say that's 30 PSI. Then your pump kicks on and pumps water into your pressure tank until the pressure inside the tank, because of the added water, gets up to maybe 60, and then it shuts off. And then as you use water, it's pushing water out of your pressure tank through your pipes to your faucet and your shower and everything else. And then as the pressure in the pressure tank lowers, eventually then it'll get back down to 30, and then it'll kick back on again. So I recommend you watch this video and the other one I mentioned on why does my well why does my water keep losing pressure? It'll give you some information, but it's really likely based on where your settings are for your high and low pressure for your system. If it's something else, you probably need to have somebody come look at it. And today, you know, they have variable speed pumps where you just have a very small pressure tank, 1 or 2 gallons to get things started. But then the pressure that you get from when you turn on a faucet is the pump kicking on. So the more you use it, like if you have the shower on and the dishwasher and somebody's getting a drink at the same time, your pump's gonna, or your well pump is gonna pump harder at a higher rate so that it keeps the pressure at a constant pressure. And it could just be that that pressure setting's too low. I think that covers most of it. The only other option would be if you had an addition on your house and now you have a second story, you know, that's changes the game because it's got to lift it the extra, 15 feet or so. And that obviously will lower the water pressure. Do you have any advice for those of us on a shared well? So I mentioned this already. Watch that video for starters. That'll help you understand what some of the key issues are. But, and I know you asked a number of other questions. A lot of them are really great questions. I didn't feel like we could answer all of them here. So I'd prefer if you would contact us. Again, you'll get an email from us in an hour and you can email me and we can help you with some of those because there were a lot of different topics. You mentioned radon and some other things that I didn't feel like we could get into here. But watching that video, you'll understand, you talked about you haven't met your neighbors yet. That's important to get to know them and understand how they've operated things in the past. Maybe they are doing all the right things. Maybe they want you to sign an agreement. It just really depends on the situation. I would guess that's not true. In most cases, it's just a handshake or it's always been that way. But if there's ever an issue with the well or the pump, it'll cause problems if you don't have something in place. And of course, guys decide to mow, if you can hear that, right by my window now. So that's just the way life is. Can a neighboring home operating a business out of a garage with a floor drain that discharges to the gravel under the garage slab on a 12-acre lot adversely impact the adjoining neighborhood's water aquifer in which they draw water from, private wells of all the owners in the subdivision? Okay, so the bottom line here is someone's got a business in their garage, they have a floor drain, whatever they're doing is discharging under the garage and there's no capture of any, if it's oil or some other kind of chemical or whatever. Clearly that's a risk for contamination. And whether or not that's actually going to affect the well really depends on a lot of things, what they're discharging, all that. But the bottom line is that's illegal. If you're friends with your neighbor, I understand you might not want to get your neighbor in trouble, but I would contact the local health district or county health department in your area and make them aware that this is going on because no one's supposed to be pouring things onto the ground that are potentially hazardous. But as far as your particular risk for your well, it really depends on what's being discharged and what the geology is, not only under the garage and the soils, but also on the aquifer where you're getting your water from. If in Champaign County, I mentioned here where we're at, there's 100 feet of clay and till, which does not let water flow through very well from the surface down to 100 feet or more before you even get to the aquifer. So that would honestly have no effect on that aquifer in all likelihood. It would all get absorbed into the soil and, it would just, unless it's a huge quantity, it's never going to make it down to that aquifer. But if you're in a sandy area or, it's a shallow aquifer, then certainly those things could be more of a problem. And I'm assuming your neighbor also has a well, which is probably closer than any of the others to that garage. So all those are things to consider. It's really hard to answer what kind of effect it might have without knowing, a lot more about the situation. So, contacting your local health district or county health department is probably a really good idea. So on to the questions we've asked today. That's what I have for the webinar, but I need to get out of this and see if we have questions. Let me pull up. Didn't go to full screen. There we go. I need to make this larger. I meant to do this before. Sorry. Okay. Sally, is that readable? I'm going to assume it is. All right, you're breaking up. Should you be testing monthly? I don't know a situation where it would require that. Your groundwater shouldn't be changing that quickly to be that kind of an issue. I know with some really shallow aquifers, it might be a cause to test more than once a year, just because if you have an old bored or dug well and it's a sandy aquifer and you have a wet season in the spring, or there's some big rain events, usually it's a well that's not very protective where you might want to consider that. But, you know, I think the standard protocol, if you will, works pretty well. Sample annually for coliform nitrate to make sure your well integrity is still in place, and then every 3 to 5 years for inorganics, metals, and other things. And then, you know, if there's some other issue, obviously you want to test to find out why. Will an RO system work for manganese? You know, I am not 100% sure, but manganese acts like iron. And so an iron filter will also remove manganese. In fact, if you have an iron filter and there's manganese there, it will also remove it. I'm guessing it does, but I think as much iron and manganese as there is in a lot of groundwater, using an RO for that would be really expensive because the cartridge and the membrane's going to get filled up and clogged pretty quick. You can look on that guide. I mean, it's a metal, so it does remove it. I just think there's probably better treatment options for manganese. And just so everyone's aware, manganese is listed on the EPA's website as a secondary MCL, which means it's not a health risk. It's for taste or aesthetics, you know, with smell, staining, whatever it might be. But research in the last 6 to 8 years has shown that manganese does cause health effects, especially neurological effects in children. And so when EPA is going to issue a primary MCL for that, I don't know, but a number of states have already created their own regulation for manganese, which is another example of where states have taken things into their own hands. And I know Health Canada has a health standard for manganese now. And if you get a water sample done, you should definitely test for manganese as one of the metals you test for. And if it's high, you should treat to remove it for sure, especially with children. So the difference between classes Well Care 101 and Groundwater Well Construction 101. Well, what we didn't talk about today are the 3 types of wells. There's certainly some of the things similar. Today we really talked about, you know, like treating. We talked about septic tanks. We talked about treatment. We talked about sampling, where in groundwater and well construction, it's really just about groundwater and wells. You know, difference between types of aquifers, what parameters allow water to flow through the ground, the hydrologic cycle, bedrock wells versus sand and gravel wells versus, you know, they're meant to be a number of basic classes that help a well owner learn more about their well and the things they need to do as a steward of their well and water quality. And so they may have a little overlap, but they're meant to be a little separate, or more or less separate. I wondered if a well that had a bad sulfur odor, let me slide down here, corrects itself. I don't believe so. We went from a dry season with a strong odor to a wet season and no longer have the odor. You know, there's a I don't have it in front of me, but that sulfur smell could be caused by a number of things. It could just be sulfur in the groundwater, which isn't that common. It'd be a bedrock situation typically, or it can be sulfate reducing bacteria and iron bacteria that are growing in your well or in your line somewhere. And that's where that smell comes from. And in those cases, which is much more common, the only way to get rid of it is to chlorinate. And the problem is those bacteria are naturally occurring in groundwater and they'll come back in most cases. So it's something you'd have to do on some kind of time basis. But if it corrects itself, sometimes I know if it's only in your hot water line, then it's to do with the rod in your hot water heater. And I need to go look at the information for that before I botch this. But I've not heard of a case where you have that odor in the wet season and not in the dry season or whatever, or vice versa. And I don't know why that would occur. I need to know more about your well and how that, your well's obviously affected by surface water in some way for that to occur if more rainfall all of a sudden causes this odor to go away. Yeah. That's interesting, to be honest. So, well, it's 3 and Central Time, and it looks like we've got through all the questions. Thanks for your time today. And if you have anything else, you can follow up with me or through our info@privatewellclass.org. Here's the information for that email address. And thanks for attending.